This is Kate at the Library of Whispers, and today I'm going to continue my reading all about pirates in this vintage book. This time I thought we would read about the infamous Captain William Kidd. sailed, when I sailed. I roamed from sound to sound, and many a ship I found, and then I sunk or burned when I sailed. I murdered William Moore, and laid him in his gore, not many leagues from shore, when I sailed. Farewell to young and old, all jolly seamen bold. You're welcome to my gold, for I must die, I must die. Farewell to London town, the pretty girls all around. No pardon can be found, and I must die, I must die. Farewell, for I must die. Then to eternity, in hideous misery, I must lie, I must lie. It was 2 hours before the procession reached Execution Dock at Wapping on the edge of the Thames mud flats. The gallows awash at its base at high tide, now stuck up out of the mud. Beside the scaffold stood the Reverend Paul Loren. He had gone on ahead in order to greet the prisoners, but when he set eyes on Kidd, he saw to his unspeakable grief that the captain was inflamed with drink, which had so discomposed his mind that it was now in a very ill frame, and very unfit for the great work now or never to be performed by him. The captain would still not confess his crimes or ask for forgiveness. He expressed abundance of sorrow for leaving his wife and children, recalled Loren. Indeed, the thoughts of his wife's sorrow was more occasion of grief to him than that of his own sad misfortunes. The constables prodded Kidd onto the scaffold, and the hangman fitted the noose around his neck. The crowd waited, noisy and gleeful. Loren sang a penitential psalm and said a short prayer, and then the hangman pushed the unrepentant drunk, William Kidd, into space. But if Captain Kidd had one outstanding characteristic in his life, it was bad luck, and bad luck did not desert him now, for he had dangled only briefly from the gallows arm before the rope snapped under his weight, tumbling him down into the mud. A great shriek went up from the crowd. Confused and stunned, Kidd was manhandled up a ladder and tied to the gallows tree a second time. The indefatigable Loren, seizing his chance, clambered up the ladder behind him, and balanced in this precarious position, tried one more time with urgent pleas to get the poor old sailor to repent his sins. So the old salt, not knowing exactly where he was or what was happening, gasped it out, and the chaplain, at last satisfied, climbed down. Then the hangman yanked away the ladder, and the judicial murder was complete. At the time of his death in 1701, and for generations after, Captain Kidd was popularly regarded as a maritime gangster of the most evil sort, the apotheosis of a cutthroat pirate, but nobody endured a worse reputation with less reason. No pirate of the day spilled less blood or captured fewer prizes, though not entirely by design. If he was a cause célèbre, it was because of political intrigue rather than actual crime. For the complex story of Captain Kidd's foray into the eastern seas is inextricably linked with the shadowy figures of some of the noblest men of the British realm, and in the end, they betrayed him. Little is known of the first 45 years of William Kidd's life. He was a Scot, possibly born on Greenock, probably in 1645. He presumably took to the sea when he was a boy, and he may have emigrated to America in his early 20s. In any case, by the early 16th service against the French in the West Indies in 1689. Returning home, he married a lovely English woman, Sarah Ortt, who had outlived two previous husbands, though she was still only in her early 20s. Through his marriage, Kidd acquired New York property, which one day would be worth a fortune. 86 to 90 and 119 to 121 Pearl Street, 52 to 56 Water Street, and 25 to 29 Pine Street. Within a few years, Kidd was not only rich but respected. He held a pew at Wall Street's Trinity Episcopal Church. He was interested in politics, and he counted himself among the confidants of the Governor of New York, Colonel Benjamin Fletcher. In the mid-1690s, following the wildly successful pirate cruises of Thomas Tew and Henry Every, the eastern seas were alive with pirate vessels. Month by month, the toll of the Great Mogul shipping mounted. Month by month, the position of the East India Company deteriorated, as outraged native rulers laid the blame on the company's English managers. At last, in 1695, the king agreed to relieve New York's governor. Fletcher, who was by then notorious for his dealings with Tew and other pirates, in his place as governor of both New York and New England, the king appointed the Earl of Belmont, an Irish peer with a powerful sense of duty. His was the task of smothering piracy on the American coast from New Jersey to Maine. At the same time, the government hoped to attack the pirates in the east, but England's war with France meant that there were few ships to spare for pirate chasing, and this was when Captain Kidd came on the scene. So, over here is the Earl of Belmont, who met Kidd in London in 1695 and offered the ambitious sea captain an enticing opportunity, a privateer's commission, authorising him to attack Red Sea pirates and French traders as well. And in these images we have the Earl of Romney, Master General of Ordnance, the Earl of Orford, First Lord of the Admiralty, Sir John Somers, Lord Keeper of the Great Seal, and the Duke of Shrewsbury, Secretary of State. In the summer of 1695, Kidd arrived in London with his sloop, Antigoa, after a trading run from New York. Here he chanced to meet Colonel Robert Livingston, a prominent New Yorker, who presented him with a grandiose scheme for ending Red Sea piracy and making a profit into the bargain. Livingston's idea was to dispatch a specially built privateer ship under a specially qualified privateer captain, with the backing of a syndicate of influential men who would recoup their investment with the profits from captured pirate booty. Like all enterprises doomed to failure, this one was flawed at its heart. While it purported to be a praiseworthy act of international policing, it was in fact merely a device for making a financial killing of astronomical proportions. For the real target was not so much the pirates, but the prodigious plunder presumed to be in their ships. There was thus at the outset an ambiguity 1695, Livingston, Belmont and Kidd signed the Articles of Agreement. Belmont was responsible for finding 4/5, that's £6,000 of the cost. This sum coming from the 4 anonymous noble backers. Livingston and Kidd together put up 1/5. As was customary, the first 10% of any booty would go to the Crown. The remaining 90% would be split 3 ways: 60% for Belmont's backers, 15% for Kidd and Livingston, and only 25% for the crew, not the usual 60% of a privateering agreement. There was to be no share out of the spoil during the cruise, only at the end when it had been properly condemned by an Admiralty court. If there should be no booty, Kidd and Livingston were to pay back every farthing their backers had put into the venture. A few months later, Kidd was issued 2 special commissions. To overlay this private venture with an official veneer, one was a letter of marque, which empowered Kidd to capture any ships or goods belonging to Britain's enemy, France. The other was a commission from the King issued under the Great Seal of the Crown of England, empowering Kidd to seize pirates, in particular 4 named pirates including Jew and their ships, and merchandises, money, goods and wares. The commission referred to him as our trusty and well-beloved Captain William Kidd, but it also contained a prophetic warning: "We do hereby jointly charge and command you, as you will answer the same at your utmost peril, that you do not in any manner offend or molest any of our friends or allies, their ships or subjects." Now in this image here, we can see that this is a letter of marque. Led the unfortunate Kidd to believe that he enjoyed complete royal protection. Dated December the 11th, 1695, bears a sombre portrait of King William III. None of these arrangements was particularly advantageous to Kidd. To raise his part of the expenses, he had to sell his ship and a third of his interest to a London speculator. What he would get in return was dubious. There were few French in the eastern seas, and the chances of any crew of his capturing elusive pirates were slim at best. The whole enterprise was vague and equivocal. To give him his due, Kidd had tried to wriggle out of it at the start. He knew how fine was the distinction between privateering and piracy. He knew that it was usual for privateer crews to mutiny and turn pirate if there was no plunder. He was prosperous enough already, but Livingston and Belmont put great pressure on him. They took him along to the impressive houses of their noble backers. They suggested that it would be disloyal to refuse the King's commission. As Kidd later protested to one of his backers, Belmont added threats to his wheedles. Kidd felt himself powerless to oppose the all-powerful English establishment. "I thinking myself safe with the King's commission and the protection of so many great men," wrote Kidd later, "accepted, thinking it was in my Lord Belmont's power as Governor of New York to oppress me if I still continued obstinate. Before I went to sea, I waited twice on my Lord Romney and Admiral Russell. Both hastened me to sea and promised to stand by me." replacing them with a raging collection of Navy rejects. It was the kind of calamity that never should have occurred. In the first place, Kidd should have been far too seasoned a captain ever to make gratuitous insults to the Royal Navy, unless he had become giddy with power over his King's commission. And while there was never any actual proof that the press gang was in retribution, the entire incident was typical of Kidd's abysmal lack of judgment and luck for the brief remainder of his life. Kidd arrived in New York in July and did not leave until September. The sale of a French fishing boat he had captured as a lawful prize during the Atlantic crossing conveniently provided funds with which to purchase the provisions necessary for a long cruise to the Indian Ocean. But filling out the remainder of the 150-man crew was not so easy. New York was still a hotbed of piracy, the starting and finishing point of the pirate round. Kidd's proposed crew against pirates in the eastern seas was not likely to prove a popular proposition to seamen whose friends were pirates or who were pirates themselves. To attract any sort of crew at all, Kidd was forced to raise their share of the profits to 60%, though he does not appear to have informed his sponsors of this change. He eventually set sail with a full complement of 150 men, one of them his brother-in-law, Samuel Bradley, but it was a sorry lot he had picked himself. Even Colonel Fletcher, who was still governor, pending the arrival of Lord Belmont, had a low opinion of them. Many flocked to him from all parts, he wrote to the Board of Trade, men of desperate fortunes and necessities, in expectation of getting vast treasure. It is generally believed here that if he misses the design named in his commission, he will not be able to govern such a villainous herd. It took the Adventure Galley 5 months to reach the pirate island of Madagascar. The voyage does not seem to have reduced the arrogance that the Great Seal of the King's Commission had apparently induced in Kidd. He had already affronted the Royal Navy in the Thames. He was to do so again off the Cape of Good Hope. On December the 12th, 1696, about 100 miles northwest of Cape Town, he fell in with a Navy squadron under Commodore Thomas Warren. Kidd demanded from the Commodore some new sails to replace ones he had lost in an Atlantic storm. The Commodore curtly refused. Kidd then told him that his commission entitled him to aid, and if the Navy refused, it would seize the sails from the first merchant ship he encountered. Angry words were exchanged, and Commodore Warren threatened to press 30 of Kidd's men. The next morning, so Kidd, in the calm of night, sneaked away with the use of his galley's oars and sailed into the eastern seas without calling at Cape Town, where he would certainly have been arrested. Kidd was just as untactful with the East India Company. At Joanna Island, he was joined by an East Indiaman, flying a Navy pennant. Kidd told the East Indiaman's captain to strike the pennant, as only he, Kidd, had the right to fly a Navy flag. By virtue of his royal commission, the East India crewmen were so suspicious of Kidd that they kept their guns trained on him throughout his stay, and warned him to leave harbour before they boarded him. Kidd had thus earned a most dubious reputation before he had even set off on his Indian Ocean cruise. After taking on water at Joanna, Kidd made for the nearby island of Mahila his surviving crew seemed to have treated as a perfectly ordinary event of life at sea. It was now more than a year since the Adventure Galley had first set sail from the Thames, and neither Kidd nor his surviving crew had earned a penny. Provisions were running low, and those who had been recruited in New York began openly to advocate piracy. On April the 27th, 1697, Kidd set sail northward to the Red Sea. From this point onward, the trap that Kidd had unwittingly laid for himself could be said to be well and truly sprung. So we have an illustration here. It says, costumed more like a courtier than like a seagoing cutthroat, Captain Kidd kicks his family Bible into a sandy grave in this 1837 depiction of one of the legends about the star-crossed captain. The story has it that Kidd launched his piratical career by burying the book near Plymouth Sound. In July 1697, the Adventure Galley dropped anchor off the small island of Perim in the Narrows at the mouth of the Red Sea. This was a favourite ambush spot for pirates, for the big convoys of Arab and other merchant ships from Mocha, chief port of the Yemen coffee trade, provided rich pickings. It was an appropriate spot, therefore, for Kidd to lie in wait, either for pirates or enemy, meaning French, prizes. Several times, Kidd sent a small boat through the Straits of Mocha. On the third reconnaissance, it returned with news that 14 or 15 ships appeared ready to sail, but for 3 weeks, Kidd rode at anchor, waiting for them to come. Through the Narrows, day after day, the sun burned down out of a cloudless white sky. The humidity reached saturation point, and the cooling southwest monsoon wind died, leaving only a stifling stillness upon a fiercely glittering sea. Kidd must have reviewed his options time and again. He was in an equivocal position. He had been sent out to capture pirates, and had been given a letter of marque, empowering him to take French vessels as well. But since it was customary for vessels to fly whatever flag they deemed convenient at the moment, it was not always easy to discover a ship's true identity. Indeed, it was sometimes impossible until the other crew chose to reveal its allegiance. What would happen if he set off in pursuit of a strange sail, and that ship resisted him? Suppose he pressed the matter, and lives were lost in the ensuing action. Suppose then that his target ship turned out to be neither pirate nor French, but Dutch, or infinitely worse, English. On the other hand, what would happen if he played it safe, and in so doing came home empty-handed? How would he then fulfil the onerous financial requirements of his contract? Clearly he had to be aggressive if he was to take prizes, but suppose he could find no pirates or Frenchmen, what then? What would be the position if he captured and plundered Moorish vessels? By a strict legal definition, that would be piracy, but the authorities back home had in the past winked at the practice, and Moorish ships were customarily regarded as fair prey by the captains of Christian privateers. Where was the dividing line between privateering and piracy anyway? Kidd himself was fundamentally adverse to piracy, but his rapacious crew was not, and it was bringing intense pressure on him to take a prize, nationality be damned. And who, in that waste of Red Sea water, other side of the world, so far from home and government, cared what he did, or would ever know. Late in the evening of August the 14th, the fleet sailed out of Mocha, and Kidd took the first step along this fatal path. He went after it. There is conflicting evidence as to what took place the next morning. The fleet was neither pirate nor French, and it is certain that some ships flew English or Dutch colours, and that they opened fire on Kidd. It is certain too that Kidd fired back, but what Kidd's intentions has never been made clear. Edward Barlow, master of the Sceptre, one of the well-armed English East India men escorting the convoy, observed Kidd's manoeuvres and formed his own conclusions. At first, Barlow did not notice Kidd until someone reported that there was one vessel too many in the convoy. By this time, the Adventure Galley was right in the middle of the Mocha fleet. He showed no colours, wrote Barlow in his log, but had only a red broad pennant out without any cross on it, which the Sceptre's master took to signify an order to surrender or no quarter given. Kidd appeared to have singled out a large Moorish merchant ship as a target. Feeling him out, Barlow, in the Sceptre, let Kidd come on until he was nearly abreast, before he hoisted his English colours and fired 2 or 3 guns at the Adventure Galley. By this time, the Adventure Galley was alongside the Moorish ship, and Kidd levelled a broadside at her, hitting her in the hull and sails and rigging. The Sceptre immediately gave chase, and the Adventure Galley hastily retreated under sail and oars. By next morning, Barlow recorded, the Adventure Galley was out of sight and gone for good. Kidd had taken neither prize nor plunder in the Red Sea, and his prestige among his men sank lower still. There seems now to have been unbearable pressure on him, to which, step by step, he appears to have given way. By the end of August, when he was off the Malabar coast of India, north of Goa, the Adventure Galley met with a small Moorish bark, manned by Moors under an English captain named Barker, and with a Portuguese mate on board. Technically, the Moorish bark was not a legitimate prize, but Kidd had already proved himself a wobbly sort of king's agent by firing on the Moorish vessel escorted by the Sceptre. This time, he allowed his crew to board the bark, and they brought back a bale of pepper and a sack of coffee that he let them keep for their own mess. For his part, Kidd forced the English captain to join him as pilot, and the Portuguese mate as linguister or interpreter, valuable assets on such a strange cruise in such strange seas. One might think that in the empty vastness of the Indian Ocean, a ship could get away with virtually anything without detection, but the ports where a ship could be reprovisioned were few, and their seafaring populations regularly travelled back and forth, spreading every story. By mid-September, when Kidd put in for wood and water at Karwar, a port on the Malabar coast, between Calicut and Goa, word had spread of his activities. 2 English officers of the East India Company Trading Factory boarded the Adventure Galley and demanded the release of Barker and the Portuguese. Kidd had the men locked in the hold and vigorously denied their existence, and eventually the officers left. But 2 of Kidd's crew, not liking the turn of events, jumped ship at this point and later made depositions to the East India Company station in Bombay that Kidd was going on an ill design of piracy. From Karwar, the chief police threatening to knock their brains out with a pistol butt. They are a very distracted company, the factor continued, continually quarrelling and fighting amongst themselves, so it is likely they will in a short time destroy one another or starve, having only sufficient provisions to keep the sea for a month more. When Edward Barlow of the Mocha convoy reached Cornwall on October the 15th, the whole coast was talking about the pirate chaser who had turned pirate. At Calicut, Barlow noted in his log, Mr. Penning, the local East India Company manager, refused to provide Kidd with wood and water, even when Kidd informed him that he was sent out by the King of England. It was almost as though the ambiguity of Kidd's original contract and the conflicting pressures from his sponsors and his crew had produced in him a split personality.